I went with the impression that astrology was basically this dead thing being resurrected, and then getting into something being like, no, there's tons of different traditions where this is like a very living, breathing thing. The things that you read for in the Nakshatras have more to do with what's going to be satisfying for your soul. Using the tropical zodiac puts Rahu on the brain. It's the closest to the earth, and so it's like very material. The sidereal zodiac favors the sun, and then the nakshatras are lorded by the moon. And every time you're thinking from those different perspectives, you could be thinking about the exact same problem, but just thinking about it from a different standpoint. Then you see, like, no, really, really tangible things are happening. And I think that we could put a lot more effort as just a community as a whole and collecting data and being more rigorous in what we document and thinking about how we do this. Which do you think is the best zodiac to for making talismans?
Oh gosh. Well, excellent.
Okay.
Hello, Dira. It's good to see
Hi.
you.
We were just having a conversation about working with fixed stars in relation to nakshatra house schemes, which is a whole additional zodiac uh, behind the sidereal zodiac, so further away from us than any of the other zodiacs that we're working with. And it's a scheme that has 27 houses. Um, so you can get into really specific topics that you might not cover necessarily from a 12 house scheme that you would see in a tropical zodiac or the sidereal zodiac. And
And
there's
you've
some,
been doing a lot of research on this, and to the point to where not just have you done a ton of research, but it's really matured to a level of where you're having consults and readings with people and drilling down into like the areas of their life of where maybe they're magical practitioners who are doing some sort of magic with fixed stars or with nakshatras and seeing how that affects their life. Or even with people. This is one thing I found very interesting is looking at the kinds of people who individuals are really close to, maybe really good friends, and then being able to measure and see based off of this nakshatra system and the nakshatra rules of the distance between the nakshatras. And I hope you'll explain a little bit more. I'm really fascinated by this, so thank you for talking to me in depth about this.
yeah, it's such a like complicated area and I'm so interested in it that I kind of forget like how many pieces there are to it. But also it's once you get the basic mechanics of it down, it's really pretty easy to implement kind of regardless of what kind of system you're using. I mean, one of the things I like about it is that I commonly talk to people who use pretty much just sidereal or pretty much just tropical and um there are techniques about how nakshatras, like you go back to the regular chart that you read, and most of the techniques that I know like are in sidereal, but also at the same time, a bunch of this applies. A bunch of this is just way on the other side of this, and will apply to someone, even if they're using a tropical zodiac.
And I think this makes very clear sense, especially if you look at how the texts, like classical texts of astrological magic, there's always usually in this aside or this mention of, and the sphere of the fixed stars has most supremacy, or everything needs to be in consideration of this sphere of the fixed stars. And then it's like, okay, but we're going to talk about the planets. But there is a very strong belabor of taking into consideration the stars themselves. And so it's really nice to see that, oh, we have like just as many techniques and well thought out schemes of how to utilize that uh, with this.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, a bunch of what I'm seeing is just basically expanding on the idea that like, so-called Western astrologers in, working with a lot of planetary magic, or I mean, obviously in the stellar magic,
Mhm.
if you're working with fixed stars, uh, at, like things that we've already observed. So you'd be like, oh, okay, your sun is debilitated, you might not feel the most comfortable like putting on a Sun and Leo talisman right away. So maybe try petitioning or going to or working with things related to Regulus. And you can get kind of something similar without having to go to a planet that feels uncomfortable. You can kind of like bypass things. But with this, it's showing that because of these 27 houses getting so specific, you can uh, use the fixed stars in these ways that are really, really tailored to the individual. So, like, an example that got me thinking about this is the 24th Nakshatra house, um, which, again, it already is showing you that there's so much more we can do with this than the regular 12 house scheme, because, like, 24 is double that. So the 24th nakshatra house, primarily, most of the time you're using it from the moon's nakshatra, has to do with medicine. So, for example, my moon is in the nakshatra Jeshta, and if you go 24 houses from there, or nakshatras from there, you arrive at Chitra. And Chitra is ruled by the fixed star Spica. And Spica just feels like so good to me. Like, just like, it's a pretty benefic star, obviously, but like beyond what other people are feeling. And it's just automatically really calming. And I thought for a while, oh, well, the star's so nice. This must be confirmation bias, because I'm like naturally have this kind of skeptical mind, like, oh, it must just feel this nice for everyone. And then I talked to you, and it's the 18th from your nakshatra, which is Shatabisha. And the 18th one can be really beneficial, but it's one that will like challenge you. It's kind of the one that has to do with, like, do you get your medal? Do you get to wear your crown? Like, you gotta work really hard to like win the race, and then once you get the medal, you gotta fight really hard to like keep it. And so,
Totally. When you asked me, I remember you were like, Josh, what do you think about like Spica? And like without a beat, just like, oh, dislike it.
yeah.
Absolutely dislike it. And you're like, whoa, okay, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, what do you mean you dislike one of the most benefic and like famous fixed stars? Like, oh yeah, hate it, dislike it. And then but in that is because like it has created so much challenge in my life, but also like a life defining challenge in the way that I primarily, and I was talking to you and some of our other mutual friends about this, and it really took the conversation for me to understand it, I think, in this like 18th from light, but just making the talisman of Venus and Libra speak a conjunction that I did, that was like what really made me choose this path in my life of like, do I pursue Indian classical music and singing, and really let myself engage in that spiritual discipline of singing. And it's like, it hasn't been easy. Like, it takes like a lot of practice, and it's not like I'm like a all expense paid full-time musician either. And now it's like 10 years down the line, but it's probably the most rewarding aspect of my life. And yeah, I've still gotten to travel the world and sing and represent the Buddha Dharma in the way that I do that. It is very much like a defining pillar of my life. But it's not super easy. Like, I wouldn't describe those experiences in the same elation that you are describing your relationship with the fixed star. So I'm interested in this technique a lot.
Yeah, it's just right away I could tell we were onto something, because it's just even the way your like demeanor changed when you talked about this star. But it's I mean, it speaks to a few different things there, where it's like the realm of the nakshatras is the furthest away from Earth, from like the main zodiacs that people are working with. And there's actually another scheme of nakshatras that I won't go too into, where you're working with 28, and then you're like really getting into abstract spiritual realms. But the things that you read for in the nakshatras have more to do with like what's going to be satisfying for your soul, and what kind of makes sense for your mind. And so it can show things that are really, really fulfilling. It does not necessarily show the sort of thing that's gonna like get you the most material success. Like, it's so far away from the world that it doesn't necessarily prioritize those things, which is where the planets that lord the nakshatras kind of end up being the intermediaries. They're almost like translators or like ambassadors. And sometimes they can also just be like just fully in the way. Like, And this is where you have to go back to the birth charts that we're all used to reading and kind of see like what the case is with the planets. But a lot of people will uh, equate the meanings of the nakshatras with the planets. That's like if somebody is just translating for someone, just saying like, "Oh yeah, this person has the qualities of their translator." Like, no, their words are being filtered through that translator, but that doesn't have anything to do with that. And
Completely. You still don't know who that person is if you just hear a
yeah.
translator talk their words, or even if you really know what they're even saying. Uh, no, that's a great point that you make there. I think because that I think may even be a little bit new to people. Just the idea that each nakshatra has like a planet that lords it, and then in the Western world of astrological magic, all of the like the mansions of the moon as as the nakshatras are usually referred to, a lot of the times you can see them as being discussed as like having the natures of like a couple planets, and it's really hard to interpret what that means. So often I think when people see or hear that, it's like, oh, does that mean that it acts like both of them together? Are they fighting? Is it describing a harmonious relationship? Is it a antagonistic relationship? Does it just mean that it's like two planets fused together compared to like all of the rich mythology and sort of oral stories we have about nakshatras? We have, you know, devatas and myths and a lot of stories that give a better contextual description of them, I would say.
Yeah. Um, and like in this instance, for the 18th nakshatra, Chitra is ruled by Mars. Doesn't really have qualities of Mars per se. It has qualities of the divine architect, but Mars is the one who's kind of like in charge of getting you to that area. And so also for someone born under Shatabisha, part of what that's gonna mean is that you take a lot of like Mars energy towards what you're achieving. It's gonna like work you harder than the average person. Like you're gonna like fight for the things that you achieve. And that's like one lens. And it's also kind of a realm that is easy to get caught up in because the planets have so much to do with like the realm of desire and like worldly things. And so, it can be really like I have to grind, I got to do like hustle, do all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I like about going to stars is you can get around that and kind of just get a direct line to them and just be like, oh, that wasn't really what I was saying. That was kind of like a misinterpretation. Um, oh yeah, I've been meaning to tell you
Yeah.
also, I learned a particularly cool thing about Shatabisha and Chitra being your
Hmm.
18th from Janma is what we say for the birth nakshatra. So being 18th from your moon. It's part of what makes you a great astrologer
Oh, wow.
because the Ayanamsha we use is true Chitra. So everything is measured from Spica. And so it means part of what you're achieving is related to knowledge of the entire zodiac. So it's the astrologer nakshatra.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I loved
Thank you.
that.
Thank you for the insight. No, that is quite incredible. That's really good. I want to definitely talk a little more about this idea of like using multiple zodiacs together in the way that you're describing. So maybe like thinking of the nakshatras are kind of like this other zodiacal system, like that we have 27 more signs. I don't know if there's anything else you want to speak to before that, but when you brought that up, it made me think of that
Yeah, I mean, I think the star stuff could just you can just go on and on forever with it. It's like such a big category. Uh,
completely. Because
yeah,
even
I
I
mean,
think another point I know I just suggested to switch topics and now I'm switching back, but like the directness that you talked about the stars and like that's been my experience with like I've made a lot of Lunar Mansion talismans
no,
and and a fair deal of fixed star talismans and the ability of like just being able to I don't know like bypass
yeah,
the planetary spheres just directly like just drop something in of like oh okay here we are. Let's go. It's like a much more refined stream of energy rather than sometimes the planetary energy is. We're bulldozing through a lot of astral chaff in order to get a result. While the alternative is like okay, boop, Here you go,
Yeah.
which I like.
Oh, we have the very loud cat has come here. Um,
Yeah, no worries.
um, yeah. Uh, it's like I think I find that it's really hard for people who are very like visual learners. So maybe at some point we can put up a little diagram. One second.
Totally.
I might have to move Lucian out of the room.
Sure,
I don't
sure.
know.
We'll cut it.
Uh, so can we edit? Maybe I should go feed the cat real quick. Okay, so the
Cat has been fed.
cat has his food. We'll figure out what kind of omen that is later. Anyways, so I was saying we're talking about the different zodiacs
Yeah.
and yeah, maybe you can find at some point like a helpful diagram because I feel like it can be a lot for people to picture. But I mean, I'm sure, have the experience all the time, as do I, where you're, speaking in a different system and people are like, wait a second, I thought I was an Aries sun and now all of a sudden I'm a Pisces sun. Like, what does that mean? Like which one is correct? And I feel like it's really helpful for people just to visualize like what each sphere is reading from and like
Hmm.
how they're all just different vantage points that, help shape the whole picture. Um, I'm not sure how you approach it when people ask you things like that or kind of like freak out because their sign changed or something.
Totally. I think how very much I approach it, I think just like really relates to like my background, I think growing up, and it's like an individual who's always been interested in like the classics and like studied Latin and like Erasmian humanism and translated like Caesar's Gallic Wars like in school from like Latin to English, and like when you understand being taught Latin and Roman history from a philologist, which is an individual who looks at the cultural underpinnings of language and how it changes throughout time, and then someone who also was kind of like pigeonholed down into like a STEM path and like science and engineering and like biochemistry. Like that's my actual background. And so I did a lot of like biomechanics work with the people who like discovered how geckos like cling to walls. Like that was like really fun. And so like
Just
I
learning
remember,
so much about your life suddenly from one of my closest friends. But anyways, go on.
and like one of the things like he taught me and he said once was like, I don't need, and he was probably the most successful scientist I've ever met, really to this day. Like full ride pass at the college, can do whatever he wants because he discovered something that's industriously insanely useful, which is actually quite rare for someone who's just did pure research. And he's like, I don't need a model of reality that's true. I just need one that works. And it's like science is a process of having a question, looking at some data, seeing what story that creates, understanding where that story breaks down, and asking new questions. So this is like one thing that like lives in my mind. And on the other end is like this like humanities aspect of it, where it's like different domains of knowledge and understanding develop their own language in order to describe the phenomenon they're experiencing. And so the language of biochemistry and organic chemistry, one has to learn that language to have a conversation with an organic chemist. Dira, what are your opinions about the steric hindrance of the kinase inhibitors that allow HIV to be cured? There's language that needs to be known in order to have a conversation about. And so I'm very much used to being in a situation where I have something to say that people have no idea what I'm saying. And so in the two different zodiac, now back to the zodiacs, it's like both of them are models that are describing something which are internally consistent and have tons of observational data, real life human qualitative data behind it, as well as objective measurable data based off of positions. Like we have the clay tablets from Babylon with the calculations, and so coming from that perspective, I don't really see there's like a conflict. It's because it's not coming from like a personal identity perspective. It's like these are models of how we're capturing information and then relaying it back to an individual and then reflecting of the meaning of this information.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's like Just if I say water and another person says agua, like is who's right?
Completely.
I wish I had a reference for who I heard use that example recently, but yeah, I think there's um there's so many good things in the thinking about it as a language example, which is also like the different language you're using also put your mind in a different place.
Totally.
And like uh like Param Guruji will talk about using the tropical zodiac puts Rahu on the brain
Mm, hmm.
because it's the zodiac that measures the seasons and it's the closest to the earth. And so it's like very material. Like Rahu's very the North Node for people who call it that is a very material, which is not always a negative thing. And then the sidereal zodiac like favors the sun, and then the nakshatras are lorded by the moon. And every time you're thinking from those different perspectives, you could be thinking about the exact same problem, but just thinking about it from a different standpoint.
I love that completely. And I think this really gets to like a closer understanding of like what really maybe is happening or like an emergent property of
Mhm.
using a sidereal zodiac or a tropical zodiac or nakshatras. It's like, you know, just like the martial artist that like trains one kick a million
Mhm.
times and the kinds of things they're able to do, or like a mechanic who's just been a mechanic for like 70 years. And it's like, oh no, we have a problem. And they can just like rip any motor apart and put it back together. There's something that I think happens by having that level of practice. And because we don't have a lot of people just sitting down and spending their whole lives doing that, it's hard for us to see those like really emergent properties of like which I of someone who maybe is just like sticking with one zodiac
Mhm.
as like their primary system, but also is operant in several others. So I love the way that you described it because it's like, how does the moon bleed through into the rest of that person's life for someone who's primarily like someone who reads the stars, who's reading using nakshatras.
Yeah. Yeah. Our teacher, Param Guruji Sanjay Roth, he, and if I can find it, I'll try to link it, but I can't remember which lecture it is. He has so many online, but there is one where he says, basically, like if you say you can only use, if you say that the tropical zodiac doesn't work, then you don't understand the Vedas. And like we don't use the tropical zodiac very often, but he's just kind of like, why would you brag about not being able to use a technique is the way that I took it.
Yeah.
And uh and again, not to speak for him, like we primarily use sidereal, but it doesn't mean that like all of tropical is just like not true. Um
Exactly. I loved when you told me about this because because I had not necessarily like heard about it before from like someone who's like in a lineage of Vedic astrology using like multiple zodiacs for using sidereal and tropical zodiac depending on like the technique. But it just made perfect sense to me. Roundabout way of like, there's a purpose for it. There's like a particular time and place in which we use this. And that just makes sense. It seems a bit overly human constructed for it to be like, no, 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 we can't touch this thing over here that's designed this way. Only use this one. Like that just sounds like the worst aspects of people rather than like, oh, this must be true.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of colonialism, this is like a thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's such a tangent, but just like so much of colonialism comes out of this kind of like perversion of Christianity, and Christianity doesn't really have like a trickster archetype. And so even if we're working in like hardcore, like scientific, materialist, like academic world, the ability to like really think in gray areas is not something that we have as much practice with, like for people who are, like coming out of that worldview, is like the majority of people like myself,
Mhm.
are in like the United States and a lot of Europe. Certainly not everyone. But yeah, I think we really look for like what is the system that is the most exact. And I always think of like if you were to go to a doctor and be like, oh my God, you took my heart rate and you took my pulse and my blood pressure and you measured my blood oxygen. Like, which one is right? You know, it's like they're all giving you different information. They don't contradict each other. It doesn't matter if they're different numbers. They're not supposed to be the same thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
you don't walk into the doctor's office super sick and you're like, you only have one sort of instrumentation to use in order to diagnose me right now. They would tell you to leave because it's impossible. It would be literally impossible.
Yeah, totally. And like the tropical zodiac, technically, because it's closer in, because you're just looking at our solar system and our seasons, and that's what you're measuring based off of, like technically it's less information, but and it tends to be a little more superficial, and tends to be better at reading for personality and things that you just like immediately notice. But I don't think that that's necessarily bad. Like, I have friends who can look at someone's tongue and tell them everything like about what's happening with them just by looking at something on the outside. There's also some things that you like don't need to use like all of the stars and the moon and like the like outer layers of heaven for. Like you can just a tropical zodiac is supposed to be really good for weather because it's just like it's right there. Like you don't need to. Um, I think a way I was thinking about it this morning is, like if you cut yourself and you just need to kind of like clean up the wound and get a bandage, like you don't need to get blood work done, probably. You can just look at it and be like, oh, I need that shape of bandage. Um, and so, yeah, I think like tropical astrology can be um, a lot more immediately accessible. It can be like a lot easier for people to kind of like have conversations in. Like a lot of the conversations that I have about astrology with just like, I don't know, kind of average, like, just like the average astrology enthusiast that you would run into in like Portland, Oregon tend to be tropical, and it's like a pretty easy exchange.
Mhm.
That feel consistent with your experience or how you use tropical, or
Gosh,
if
I'm
anything to add?
for me, I'm really like such a practically minded person. It's like I'm very much like foundational philosophy of how I live my life can is highly influenced by this uh oh my gosh, what was it? I think it came out of like the new school of entrepreneurship at Duke and it's called effectual thinking. And the main principle of that is to the degree that I can create my own reality and circumstances, I don't really need to predict it. So I've really enjoyed astrology because it's challenged that like fundamental way of which I've been able to live my life quite successfully before I decided to really delve deep into the world of astrology. So so I think it's very helpful to be able to have like additional tools in the toolkit in order to like understand like if this is the problem, these are the techniques and the processes in which we have in order to evaluate the situation and be able to give ourselves a deeper insight into what is going on. But I think, in my experience, most people, gosh, most people who are interested in talking to me about astrology really just like to basically insinuate how like bad I am for being interested in astrology. And then they're like, "Oh no, he knows too much. He's like talking about philosophy. I didn't want to have like a deep conversation about it." I wish I was getting into conversations with individuals that you're talking about. That sounds like fun. Mine are
Yeah.
either very, very technical and very, very technical, or quite surface level and kind of like, Josh, how do you find value of astrology in a modern world? Being a modern man, Josh, how do you find astrology valuable in our society today? Usually, those are the conversations,
Yeah. Oh man. It's
and that's a whole other topic.
yeah, it's the whole thing. But yeah, I feel like astrology has also been in the past like a way that I got men to leave me alone at one.
You heard it here, folks.
It's just like there's a certain threshold you cross over and you start talking about those things, people like do back away.
I also have used astrology to get men to leave me alone, so
Nice.
you're in good company.
There's something about just being like the Bodakesha and the Trigon Lord, and people are like, all right, this
I'm
not
starting
messing
to
with
I'm starting to think about my feelings. I don't want to deal with that.
that. Yeah. Uh, How do you feel about like using different zodiacs for like the term remediation, which I know both of us are
Oh gosh.
feelings about the word remediation in general, but for the sake of this
So
conversation.
so I'll tell you where I'm at with it. I'm at a place where I feel like I have to do both, but it's like from what I know in Vedic astrology, uh lineage, our lineage, it's just like way better. Like it's just like so like cut. It's just like, oh, just do this. And even some of the things I've learned in like Tibetan astrology and the general remedies you would use in Jungsi, and this is like the elemental calculation. We're not even getting to the stars. This is more like Bazi, Chinese astrology, and the general things that they would recommend um, if these areas of your life force or are going to be poor for the year, kind of like an Ayurvedic analysis.
Mhm.
Um, Even those, I think, generally people are getting better mileage out of it. But I did recently reflect on like 7 major talismans that I had made over the last 6 years. And I made these long case study videos, like almost an hour long each one. And I posted them all. And in that, I reflected on, and I posted about it, the kinds of houses that they rule in both my tropical and sidereal chart, just to do like that layer of research. And the ones that I think were best ruled beneficial houses in both tropical and sidereal systems. So
Hmm.
that was like quite interesting to see.
That is really interesting. I have seen, I used to do consults for Spear and Sundry for a while, just recommending different like materia for people and spent like a whole lot of time looking at how these like tropical elections would affect people in both systems. And it like a mysterious thing that I don't understand, but seems to be also the conclusion of like a lot of my teachers and people I respect is that seemingly it will work like even if it's a tropical election, it will work either way. Um, and I think that kind of like goes back to the layers
Hmm.
um, of things. Like if you're creating something with this intention, um, and kind of like directing it in that way, then, like a Venus and Taurus, like talisman or like talismanic, whatever sort of materia, like is going to do that
Hmm.
across things. But I think is something that could still use like more research and obviously you have tons and tons of experience with.
Totally, but I have less experience with like the materia quality of things because I think materia and talismans are like they are different in certainly in the sense that they're just made different, like they're materially different. And I definitely am of the belief that the materials do matter. They do definitely influence the situation. And so, to what degree that's still being figured out. Um, and then
Oh
there's
yeah, I
also
definitely noticed that as well. Mhm.
awesome, awesome. And then there's this idea. Gosh, there's like 2 points. One thing, there's 2 points. Um, One about a rule that I see being talked about and used in order to evaluate the effectiveness of materia or talisman in tropical and Vedic charts. And the thing is I'm pretty darn sure this comes from Vedic astrology because a I heard it from Austin, and I know where he's learned thing, where he's also, influenced by, and it has to do with under. So let me talk about this first, and this is about like analyzing the like the relative benefic or malefic nature of a planet based off of the houses that it rules in your chart, and so. And so, Jupiter, general, the greater benefic, so great, so good. But if Jupiter rules your eighth house, this dark house of maybe like karmic disease, do you really want to turn that lord up to 110%? There is, there's like a school of thought, which is like, no, 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 we can't just like make it very, very strong. But when we're looking at, well, Jupiter rules the eighth house in the tropical chart. Do I really care that it's eighth lord in the tropical chart? Do I only care about it's the eighth lord in a sidereal chart? How do we slice that situation?
Oh man. It's
This is
such
a
a big
conundrum.
conversation and like uh it's like and it goes into the whole like do we treat talismans the same way that we like talismans in this system? general system. I know it's not just exactly one thing. The same way that we treat like gem remedies.
Hmm.
In like they're not quite the same. And there's like I did a whole research project interviewing a ton of people about their experiences with like planets that say okay, like say for um a Libra rising person, uh can they use Venus in Pisces? Um and because like that's gonna put Venus, that's gonna like emphasize their sixth house.
Hmm.
And I only saw it really matter when there was a gem involved. Um, but otherwise, anytime I asked a Libra rising person in either system if like if they were just working with say like a salve or a candle or something like that, they were like, "Oh my God, that's one of my favorite series."
Well,
Um, but yeah, consistently, um, I didn't really have the results that I would expect
sure.
from if I was just doing like I would not apply it the same way that I would if I was looking at like a mantra or something to I mean, it would obviously depend on the type of mantra, but I don't know. It's just a whole, it's just like one of those things too where like people act like there's these strict rules, because people love rules and
Yes.
and uh like it has to be applied this way and it has to be applied this way. And for something like gem therapy where we have thousands of years of data on it and people like working with those things, but like how much data do we have on like talismans coming out of the Picatrix and how those actually like and
Totally.
like and like now since then we like science has so many other discoveries. Like I feel like we just don't exactly know what all these things can do or like how to apply it.
No, totally. And you just gave some amazing and just like amazing data in terms of your experience with like the Libra rising, the individual, because I think it is, for people listening who still aren't bought into a magical worldview or whatever, insane that you've stayed this far into the conversation. But I think it's it's natural just to be like, oh well, it's just like some sort of wish fulfillment, placebo effect kind of whatever thing. Like it's just the mind who that's like creating this all of itself, which I think it has merit to some degree. In Tantra Loka, Abhinavagupta, there's like this whole conversation about sthana kalpana, or like the ritual tools in which we use to have the mind form around them so we can enact the activities of magic or enact the focus. And in many ways, I've heard mantra described, mantra, protecting of the mind, having good thoughts all the time, the correct thoughts all the time. So, there is room for like this psychology only model or this mental only model to creep in. But there are these situations I do know about where people will create talismans that they so much, very much love. They want them to work well. They want them to be good. They're convinced they're good, but they're like Mercury retrograde on the ascendant, or it's some absolutely terrible combination. And regardless of what they say, it's like, oh, this person's now passed away young, and their wife died of cancer, and this horrible thing happened. Like it's not good. So it's there's like a lot of that too. So maybe their mind is weak, maybe their mantras are bad, and they're not strong enough to overcome the nature of the planet. There's so many to your point, it's just so new and people really haven't been doing it for that long. But people are now have been doing it again long enough, making these talismans from these grimoire texts. I think long enough to where we're able to see some trends, and the trends aren't necessarily what as like a beginner who maybe hasn't made hundreds of talismans and is just like regurgitating principles or thoughts about how they should work actually work.
Yeah, and there's like not really a standard of study with it. That I mean, uh that makes all of the results like uh necessarily representations of the like full extent of the science,
Hmm.
I think. I feel like there's so much just getting over uh like thinking of astrology as just like a nice idea, even for people who are pretty hardcore practitioners. I mean, I think this is the thing that like I'm pretty far into this stuff,
Yeah.
and it's still hard for me at times. But I really don't like the idea that like astrology can't you can't research it,
Mm-hmm.
that it's got some sort of like immunity to it. Um, and I think that there's kind of like this idea for a ton of people who, like maybe didn't grow up in a household that like supported a more like magical view of the world. It's a lot to get used to about the idea of this
Yeah.
like actually working. And like because of that, it can be a little bit of like anything goes, like this is all just like fun stuff. And then you see like, no, really, really tangible things are happening. And also, like, I think that we could put a lot more effort as just like a community as a whole and like collecting data and being more rigorous and like what we document and thinking about how we do this rather than just like following a few people who have things and just being like, all right, well, I'm just going to immediately go in and do whatever I need to do to get a bunch of money real quick. And doesn't matter that it's a moon in the eighth house. Like, doesn't matter that it's Mercury retrograde on the ascendant, I love that it's a dark moon. All these kinds of things. Like, no, 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 that will just be like extra spiritual. Um, it being made during Mars hour with Mars and Cancer is it's actually a good thing if you think about it like this. But uh, like in the first year of studying in this Jyotish lineage, like you can't pass the class unless you do a research project, unless you can demonstrate that you know how to think about this stuff critically and that you can take a principle, test it before you make all these statements about it, and like reverse engineer it and come up with some compelling statistical data, or make a hypothesis, see it not work out, and then change how you think about it. Like, um, and I just think it would be really good for um, the like stellar magic world to uh, kind of adopt some of those practices. Um,
Totally. Absolutely. Which is why I wanted to, like, why I did like my case study project. I spent so much time like remembering and finding, like, re-finding all my notes in my elections and then like writing it all up because I haven't really seen anything like that. Or it's like, oh, a single slide at this conference that you can maybe only see in person. And, that's like kind of cool to see like the write-ups that people make when they like release something, but it's like, what are like long-term effects? Like if we're like when we're doing clinical trials on like drugs or smoking, like you do like longitudinal twin studies over a lifetime and see like, well, what's happening in order to get a better understanding of like long-term effects. And so, you know, to one degree, I'm like testing it all on myself to like see what happens, and decently happy, decently happy with how everything's worked out so far. But I hope more people are just like having that level of interest or like rigor into it, and not seeing it as and seeing it as just like seeing the practice as something that could deserve their rigor, could deserve like the best parts of of that aspect of their mind. There's a place for that too in the practice.
yeah, it's a thing that I really respect about your work, and I really respect about Kate Kopic's work and Austin Kopic, where it's just like not only have they been doing this stuff for a really long time, but they just really are like collecting a lot of data and um, using it and taking like a really kind of like scientific approach to things without getting so lost in the technicalities. I don't know. I just um, and there's a lot of people doing pretty good work, but uh,
Of course. Well, to the degree that there's, like lots of people doing good work in terms of like people, what is it? People that look more or less like me who are making like talismans from Picatrix or what's being talked about in like Agrippa or
yeah.
Ficino's three books. Um, it's like, okay, certainly like 6, 20, like 6, 12, like 20 people? Like, okay, 30 people, 50 people. Then you think about like volume a year that are like getting made. It's like not a lot. It isn't a lot.
One thing I kind of, well, you have to go soon.
We're gonna be good.
Okay. I am a little curious, like going back to the um, topic of different zodiacs, like
Mhm.
um, which one do you think which do you think is the best zodiac to for making talismans?
Oh gosh. Well, what zodiac do I think is the best for making talismans?
Yeah, I
I
mean
have
that's like such a broad question that it's I'm like making myself laugh because it sounds kind of stupid, but like
I love it. I can say right now I have the misfortune of only using the tropical zodiac to make my astrological talismans and doing that. So so there you go. That being said, um, if you line up all of the talismans that I've made, and not just like number of talismans, but like set of elections that I've made, like a distinct, like I'm looking to get a result and we're going to be doing this. And we're taking that moment of time as like what constitutes like using that zodiac. Pound for pound, I think I get more outlier wins using the tropical zodiac, but in terms of uh, magic or ritual that is being done for an effect, the Bikram Sambat calendar, which we use at the Buddhist temple at Dance Mandala, Nitra Mandala Mahavihara, that is um, tracking all of the holidays in Kathmandu and that the Newar people use. This is like the one that probably like gets a lot of incredibly surprising results in terms of rituals to planets and certain pujas and holidays. So totally. So Bikram Sambat, everyone, the is adding is Bikram Sambat is coming into the ring. Be careful, tropical zodiac, which is a sidereal system, but it's calendrically unique compared to the Nepal Sambat calendar.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to like there's so many lineages and traditions of talismans that like are not, super just available to the public that like certainly don't use tropical. But it just seems like one of those things that there's different tools for different purposes. Like I'm talking about Austin a lot because he's been one of my main teachers.
Yep.
But him being like, talking about like the tropical makes a lot of sense for a lot of like planetary talismans because it's that kind of like immediacy and that sort of like raw power.
Yeah.
In a lot of my Vedic classes, I'm sure you've come across this too. People kind of laugh at the like overuse of planetary hours.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not that they're not like, valid and like helpful for sure, but they're just kind of like there's all these different divisions and that you can make that kind of show different ways of like approaching planets. And there's some like I'm big on the kalas that have to do with like when you want to pacify a planet, and then the planetary hours have more to do with like the raw strength of a planet. And I feel like it makes sense to me in a lot of ways to have tropical elections for these kinds of works when you're just trying to be like, oh, this planet's really good. Let me get as much of what's good from it as like, as like strongly as possible. Let me just get the thing that like packs the biggest, most noticeable punch. Um, which is not the goal all the time, in like whatever like remediation is, like um if something is awesome and you just want to get as much of that goodness as you can, like that makes a ton of sense. And if something is like confused and hurt, like, there might be another tool to use that could be a little more like zooming out. And, this is like going back to the metaphor of like, okay, you have a cut on your arm and you just need a band-aid. Well, maybe you have like an underlying condition that doesn't make any sense and you actually do need to do blood work, you know. And maybe you need to combine it with a tropical talisman and then some sort of other sidereal thing and like get everybody together and then also like go to a fixed star and like, maybe you can combine all those tools, but it feels like it just really, um, yeah, it just really depends. Um,
No, completely. I think it completely depends, and I think if there's anything that I'm really grateful I've been able to really have this perspective because I've been able to learn so much and also compare different calendars, different systems of astrological magic, of different systems of language that are discussing this realm that we're discussing. It's seeing that there is a much wider breadth of tools and perspectives of how to engage with these energies and systems that if we only look at like three books and two and a half people who are talking about those books a lot, we really fail to see that there's not just a forest with these trees, but there's a whole ecosystem, and this is one ecosystem on one side of a valley, and there's like a whole other world out there. And it's
Yeah.
like, wow, what the fruit over there must taste like. We know it tastes pretty good over here, but I bet they have bananas, and I don't even know what a banana tastes like. And geez, that could be my favorite fruit in the entire world. So it's been fun to viscerally get to experience that in these different kinds of calendars and knowledge and practice that I wouldn't ever have learned if I was like, oh no, I'm fully satiated with my little hometown valley.
Yeah, yeah. Uh yeah, and all the rules are different in each of them, and people love to get really into this and be like, okay, I know the exact thing that's right. I'm doing the complete right thing, and I'm just gonna figure out what all the rules are and I'll never go outside of it. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, if you go into a different ecosystem, they're gonna need completely different soil science. So yeah, you can't treat a banana plant like a huckleberry, as they all say.
Exactly. Yeah. Th-
Uh,
Thank you for teaching me some of your special Alaskan sayings. I haven't heard that one before.
oh, I just said that off the cuff. I
I
don't know.
I know.
That's not an Alaskan saying, but
Dang it, we
uh,
could have confused everybody right now.
yeah, totally, that would have been good. That 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 vow that I took that I can't lie is just. Anyways, yeah, I feel like it's just also so good to learn from multiple systems, even if you're like not trying to go all the way into that system. I feel like there's so many like notes that you can take from different places that can like inform a practice, and this kind of like fear of getting outside of a bubble and like everything looking really different, and then like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to like change. And
Mhm.
like, I mean, I had this when I uh switched to like the sidereal zodiac, for instance, and then like there's now knowing like there's so many other systems that are gonna give me a completely different lens even, and like have completely different rules, and like those are valid too. But yeah, like when I switched to my like sidereal chart, and it was like suddenly I have the sun in detriment and my ascendant is lorded by this like fallen moon. Like, I was clutching my pearls a bit. Like, I'm not gonna do that. It's so different and weird. And now, like, a thing that I talk about all the time is just like, now that I know what it means to have a tropical Sagittarius moon and a sidereal Scorpio moon, and then in the nakshatra scheme be like a Jeshta moon. Like, I'll just be like all the time I'll be like, oh yeah, I did that because like I'm like a Scorpio moon, and like I did that because it was like also like a Scorpio moon like Jeshta thing. Um,
Totally.
and
And what like a tremendous like language of understanding like the multifacets and layers of yourself too you're able to get with that. It's not just like, oh, I have to fit all of my life experience into like one placement. You have like a wider range of articulation. You have and there's also this wider range of articulation of life, which I think is always good. I think is always good.
yeah, I think it scares a lot of people to think like, oh my God, if I learn this thing, I'm gonna have to give up everything that I've learned so far. And like, I just don't think people need to be that afraid of that. Like, I mean, certainly, did you learn any of these things and be like, oh my God, now I have to throw everything I learned before this in the garbage? Or did it make it all seem like more enriched and beautiful? Like,
Definitely more enriched and beautiful,
yeah.
just because in the ways that I have learned these sorts of things, like these like forms of spirituality and like ancient wisdom and old wisdom, and I think I've always preferred and hunted and like a dog chasing the scent of uh like a Looney Tunes animated pie that is wafting out into the world.
Yeah.
It's like I've always like sought like where is like old wisdom from people who are still alive that have carried this and have lived their lives by these things. And so those are the people I try to really collect primarily as my teachers, or at least those are individuals that I feel very close to, and I respect that knowledge and wisdom tremendously. And so to finally find myself like in like a version of astrology where like that's the thing. it feels great, and I think it gives better context to the knowledge that I did have. Um, and then as like a skillful technique, when I was learning, I was really happy just to be like learning straight from scratch in like a systematized way, because I never really had that experience before. And I did sort of adopt this idea of like, I'm just gonna throw everything out of my brain, pretend I don't know anything, and then just like learn it straight from first principles. And then that's also what we were recommended to do if we kind of like our cup was too full, like empty it out and let it refill. Thankfully, I'm definitely way past having that be an issue for me of like when learning something. Is like I'm happy just to be a straight beginner again and then build myself up. But that has its own risks and benefits. But it's been really valuable to learn the learn the Jyotish in this lineage way, and I think it's made me more appreciative and able to understand the other tropical astrology that I know.
There's something that's like so special about learning from lineages that like aren't being reconstructed. Like they just have been going. Um, and it's like, I don't know, it's really striking to me how much, like how long I went with the impression that like astrology was basically this like dead thing being resurrected, and then getting into something being like, no. Uh, there's tons of different traditions where this is like a very living, breathing thing. And moreover, like a lot of these traditions like are holding pieces of those traditions that people are like trying to reconstruct. Um, it's like you can try to put together a bunch of IKEA furniture um, without the manual, or you can like look at somebody who already has the thing together that you're building. But I think people are like, no, 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 that looks different than what we think this is going to be. So I can't use that one. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to talk about this stuff without it being just feeling like coming off really combative, which is also not what I'm trying to do. But
And I think everyone can just sort of understand that's the nature of the situation. But like for me, who like really learned about astrology and came to like paganism and all this through like my Catholic school education in my Latin class, and like learning about like the history, like a little bit of the history of like archaeology and classics, and how it really used to be just like, I guess these are our best guesses about how people actually lived, and it is kind of like a made up LARP, and having to understand that there are certain things that like we cannot know, but there's also certain things that we can know, and like we kind of have like a duty to honor and respect those who have been before us, because they're just like us, they're people. Just to like honor that. Um, like in all of the traditional martial arts I did, like our headmaster was always was telling us, because always telling us to think about how many people had to die on the battlefield in order for these techniques to still exist today for us to learn it, because it was like a traditional lineage. And it was like people died because they couldn't do this right, and then people were killed because these won. And so there's real human life on the line to the knowledge that we learn when it comes to lineage. And it's kind of like intense, but I think it's good for me at like 15 to be hearing that it's
mhm.
like knowledge exists because your ancestors and people before you like ushered it in to the present. And so I'm always just like really supportive of the idea that we could be learning something that still exists rather than making it up. Like I don't need to. Yeah, it's like, why let us stand on the shoulders of the giants rather than have to recreate something.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think that there's also a fear that I understand too, of something being older, um, because like, if you grew up with like, especially with like, say, a lot of like spiritual trauma, which can happen in like any major religion, but just like, in my instance, there's like Christianity, so people are picturing something being older, and it's like something that's automatically gonna have these really like kind of harsh backwards ideas, and like, like there's a fear of digging into the past if digging into the past is something that you associate with like homophobia and
Yeah.
racism and like all it's just all these like horrible oppressive forces and like obviously I don't think that that is true a lot of the time, but like I understand people being like guarded in that way. Which has also been an interesting thing because a lot of people have like approached me about Jyotish and been like, "Oh, I want to learn this, but I'm scared that it'll be like associating something traditional with something that's going to be like transphobic or
Mhm.
homophobic towards them." And like what I think is actually really cool is when it's something like so old like that, the techniques in the Navamsha that are just like so incredibly neutral. Like if anything, like they're just celebrating like what people are, and like one of the major ways that we rectify charts is like, oh, is this showing like someone who's like super gay or someone who's like sort of gay or someone who's like super straight? And is this showing like you feel really comfortable in your gender? Is this showing like you might be non-binary or you might be trans or like you might like like and just all those things being represented as being like so just normal and like so kind of
Yeah.
like uh it's not like oh my God you're so brave or like oh my God this thing is so bad. It's just like oh yeah yeah you're a little gay. Like, just so there was also like a funny thing when I first started learning this. There's like just pretty straightforward techniques, and I don't know if you've experienced this too, but for a while, like my sort of just overly literal way of thinking about things, I was like, man, so many people in the class are really having trouble grasping this whole like how to see if you're gay in the Navamsha. Like it's not that hard. And I have these like classmates who would be like, no, 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 it's definitely like it has to be this condition and this condition. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's just like this, and this. And I realized it was all of these dudes just being really afraid that we'd find out they're gay. Um, that's like a whole aside. Also, like I just remember there's multiple times when I've been rectifying charts and kind of forgetting like how loaded some of those questions are for people.
Sure.
But anyways, all that to say, like, here's this thing that's thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, and just being like, oh yeah, here's the condition to look for like any kind of gender variance and like these various different kinds of gender variance and different kinds of sexuality, and it all just being that's just like, yeah, that's just how people are. Duh.
And it's something like this is how people have always been. And I think
Yeah.
that's such an empowering thing to like see and to stumble upon and find because I think we're because some things in the present can be just like so bad and like so like anti-life. It's
Hmm.
easy to it's like what other data do we have as humans living today sometimes to be like it must like how could it not have always been this bad or how could or I hope that this is somehow better because it's just so terrible. And I think I think I've had a lot of conversations in the opposite, or I'm around individuals with an opposite situation of where they're like, really the current set of circumstances is like so bad they kind of retreat into the past as like a fortress of solitude against the present. And I think it's a hard pill to swallow either way, and it takes a lot of maturity to study something that is very old, that is also still alive, and to acknowledge the fact in the ways that it is like still alive and changing. And there's like real people alive today that are doing it, and so we don't need to like reconstruct it or hope about it. We could also just like learn how things are. And it's like a complicated thought I always think about, but I remember reading there's like I don't know if you're familiar, there's this book called like Damien by Herman Hesse. He wrote like a book called Siddhartha, which is more popular,
Yeah.
but the Damien book was kind of like my introduction to Gnosticism. And so it's all like coded to be like a very like basic Gnostic thing, which is like all of the like everything you see and experience is like a reflection of yourself. And it's like you're supposed to like you're walking through like this person's journey of experiencing that. But he meets like this like the closest relationship he forms is with like this old guy who kind of like lives in a mansion and it's piece of literature, so it's all super heavy-handed. So he lives in like this mansion, and I think he has basically kind of like the ceremonial magician guy who is studying all these old texts. And but the point you get is he says that he's like I'm an antiquarian, like this is the best it ever has been, and it's never going to be better than this. And we have to cling to all these things so hard to a point to where he fully, like, he doesn't live his actual life. He's like locked away in this castle with no friends except for this like this young kid. And then the kid is actually only interested because he's like actually going through his life, and he finds these symbols and these things that are very meaningful to him right now. And he kind of like has to pick, like, oh, I either need to understand how things are living right now, or I kind of end up like this guy. That's kind of like the point. And so it's tough when you're stuck in, if you don't have like the contemporary perspective of things being alive, and you're only in this past oriented mode of interpretation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just goes back to there's such a fine line to walk and like so many gray areas and like and it is a strange time because it also like, just speaking from astrology, but obviously this applies to like so much other stuff. There are a lot of texts that are there's not a whole lot of information on. There is a whole bunch of stuff that's like it is new. Um Another thing that like I think about a bunch because I basically started studying Vedic astrology at the same time as Hellenistic astrology. But like, not in a lineage. Um, and there was always this kind of like divide between them and like thinking about like what was like my lane to stay in.
Mhm.
Uh which I think obviously is like an important thing to stay conscious of. And like uh I also feel like in a lot of the new stuff, like the newer kind of, I don't know, whatever people are recovering, um, people don't realize how much uh old stuff they actually are using. Like, I mean, I'm saying this in kind of a confusing way, but like I'll see a lot of people really put any tradition that they see as different, um, kind of like in its own category, like thinking that they're doing it out of respect, but it actually just ends up being kind of like erasure. Like you can't, um, just looking at like, Freedom Cole talking about in class, like just showing pictures of trade routes. And it's like you can't practice any of this and be like, oh, but I'm only going to stay to this region. And it's like, no, look at how far those trade routes went. They went through like all of China and like so much of Africa and,
Mhm.
like into parts of Europe and, um, like,
And if you, in the same way that, those of us who study this are really into it and always talking to each other about it, like anyone who's into something, if you were on those trade routes, if you're the astrologer, like, of course you'd be talking to everyone around it. You'd be going from like, oh, I'm about to die in the Gobi Desert, whole like moving this opium right now or whatever it is, all these spices. I can't wait to get to my outpost so I can hang out with another person who's studying this and like drink and eat and be alive and discuss the things that we love. Like some modicum of that is going to be going on. It's not like I am a Hellenistic astrologer. I There are no Africans here, and there is no Indians, and this is all Hellenistic. Um,
Yeah. It
yeah.
goes into also like the thing about how it, like blew my mind so much when I learned this that the Vedic capital at the time of like Alexander the Great was Bactria.
Oh,
And
wow.
like Alexander had one of his wives was like from Bactria, which is like modern day Afghanistan.
Wow.
Which is part of like and people there's like this argument of like what do you call Vedic astrology, and people are like, oh, it should be called Indic astrology. I mean, I think also it's kind of like, different people can have different reasons for things, but a bunch of it like wasn't in like India didn't exist at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, India is like a pretty recent country, but Vedic just means like culture. Also, there's the Vedas, of course, but like and like you can't like you can't just like remove one culture from an area that where there was like a ton of like exchange happening. And there's a lot of cultures like that that like very much contributed to this whole thing, but you know,
Completely.
yeah. Um,
Completely. And I think we owe it to them. Like to I think anyone whose lives are impacted by this kind of stuff. In general, I think, and then besides that, we owe it to them not to erase them from the
yeah.
lives that they lived and all of that. And I think if anything, um, I think it may potentially maybe it's natural for people to do that because, astrology mainstream has been just like compressed down into just like this shameful footnote of the human mind.
Yeah.
And so to reckon the fact that so many cultures and civilizations in like we're so involved in this is very counter to that. Is very counter to that narrative. So I get it, but of course I'm the one saying that we owe it to educate ourselves. I think we owe it to everything to educate ourselves, to just increase our knowledge about the subjects that we're interested in and that we respect and that we love. There's nothing wrong with that, and we should do it.
Yeah.
Well, Dira, I know we're running into our scheduled time today. Thank you so much for sitting down and having this chat about Vedic astrology and the Nakshatra systems, and uh, you know, branching out into some various topics on remediation and even uh, conceptualizing the history of astrology.
Yeah, thanks so much for making time to meet.
You're
It's
very
really
welcome. Anytime, we'll have to do it again.
fun. Okay, I'm sure we will. All right.
Epic.